What's the creepiest display of intelligence you've seen by another human? A friend once showed me his guidebook to how to handle his girlfriend. He'd taken notes on her likes and dislikes, what he'd given her, and precisely how she responded, as well as which actions caused which responses in her, what phrases he could quote at her to yield particular responses, etc., and then sort of used the information he'd collected to write a little guide to expected outcomes of various things he does, so that he could, quote, diffuse her if she got mad at him. If she felt unloved, he had strategies for fixing the situation so he could go back to doing whatever he likes while she gets off his back. If X, then Y will likely do Z unless P. It was somewhere between oddly sweet and creepily manipulative. Story 2. In real life, my sister, hands down, and it's an ongoing thing. You remember the scene in The Matrix where Carrie Ann Moss downloads helicopter flight knowledge into her brain? Watching my sister just go about her daily life is like a never-ending loop of that scene. Dishwasher is broken? 10 literal minutes of YouTube later, she's got it figured out. The what, the how, the why, and it'll be fixed in half an hour if the parts are in stock at Lowe's. Car making a funny noise? Get her on FaceTime, pop the hood, crank the engine, and she's got it located and ID'd, and estimates from 3 local shops for you to pick from. Random archaeological discovery mentioned in passing on the daily MSN headlines? She read the journal article already, and isn't it interesting how that validates so-and-so's findings from his dig in Chile in the 80s? Girl, since when do you know about fossils? Crazy complicated super esoteric recipe from Thailand she's never tried? I'll bet you $1,000 she'll glance at the recipe twice and whip out a version you could sell in a restaurant. She remembers your coworker's sister's boyfriend's birthday, and that he really likes chocolate sprinkles but not rainbow. She can get a feral dog eating out of her hand and get it to let her give it a bath and diagnose what's wrong with its back leg from 10 paces away. Hey sis, do you happen to know anything about welding? How to preserve this old dress I found in great-grandma's attic? What should I do about these weird bugs on my tomato plants? Oh, of course you know. Her bosses at work keep trying to move her up the chain, but she's not interested because it'll cut into her jam-making time or something. But they all come to her first when there's a question or problem they can't fix, and they listen on the first go. Her husband says he's seen her ask the general manager what flavor of stupid he ate for breakfast this morning, and has seen him apologize for the error in judgment. She'll tell you she's not that smart, she just has a good memory, but hey, I don't know, man. It's terribly handy to have her on my side. But if she ever decides to take over the world, we're all screwed. Story 3. I worked with someone briefly when I worked for the police. He came to my team to get frontline experience for promotion. He'd been in a secretive investigation unit before coming to us. I'll call him Dave. We went into this area with loads of gang-on-gang violence, and we were enforcing a Section 60 stop for weapons after a nasty murder in the area. We stopped 2 men at the side of the street, and it was immediately obvious that they had nothing to do with any of it. We chatted for a bit, and that was it. Or so I thought. Dave, being incredibly polite and friendly, said to one of the men, "Hey, I think I know you." The man said that he didn't. He'd never been in trouble with the police, never been arrested, never gets in any bother whatsoever. He was in his 30s, this fella. Dave said, "I do know you. Let me have a look at you." The man was good-natured about it, even though I was feeling bloody awkward. "I've never been in any trouble," said the man. Dave looked at him and said, "I believe you haven't. Your dad did, though." He calls the man by his name, his date of birth, his old address, his mum's name and date of birth, and his dad's details too. Dave says that 22 years previously he'd attended the bloke's house when he was a preteen because his parents were arguing and his dad was drunk. His dad was arrested for a minor sleep-it-off breach of the peace. He wasn't a regular criminal or anything like that. Dave had not only recognized the guy, but he'd done it from when he was a child, aged him, and remembered every bloody detail for a minor thing over 20 years previous. No wonder he was in the high-end investigation units. Genius. A very useful skill to have in that sort of field of work, I guess. Like, I would get it more if he actively tried to remember it for some reason and it was important, but this was super not important. Just remembered everything and had the ability to recognize someone from seeing them once when they were younger, I think. Brother, I can't even recognize people I went to middle school with. I saw one in a computer shop recently, he was working, and I had to look at him for like 5 minutes awkwardly before I'm like, I think I know you. That might be a me problem though. Story 4. When I was in med school, I was tangentially friends with a guy who never showed up to uni at all, skipped all of the lectures, called in sick for all the lab and tutorial sessions. The night before second year finals, he was around my house and said he had spent the last week watching every lecture at 2 times speed. Dude placed top 10 out of 300 students in every exam. And mind you, it wasn't just he remembered everything, he had a functional, lateral, applicable knowledge of all the stuff we had to know much better than most people who actually showed up. I always shuddered to think that if he applied himself, he would be a monster of a man, but dude was content to just chill. Story 5. I had to learn collegiate level German in the military, which was a 9-month class. We started off with 15 people and graduated with 6. It was really hard, and I barely made it through. The top kid in my class was a basic white kid from Indiana. He had already tested out with top scores in Spanish and Portuguese in a matter of weeks. He not only knew those languages perfectly fluently, he could switch dialects fluently between the Dominican Republic and Spain, or Brazil and Portugal. His story was the schools were scheduled for a specific length of time with a report date already set that was kind of far out, so the Defense Language Institute, our school, kept throwing languages at him. He figured that out and started taking his time in class. But like halfway through German, he turned in a science fiction book he had written to our teachers completely in German. Then they put him in Arabic, then Farsi, which were each 1.5-year-long schools on their own. So in the 9 months I was there to learn how to read, write, and speak German, which already had an expected high failure rate, he did the same for Spanish, Portuguese, German, Arabic, and Farsi, including different dialects, accents, and he wrote a couple books. Before he came, he said he knew, quote, some Spanish from working construction after high school and liked the idea of becoming a linguist, but he had never actually tried learning before. Besides languages, he seemed extremely normal, but no one knew he was writing books. We already had like 4 hours of homework every night. It was insane. Edit. We were friends and I asked him his method. He said his favorite way to learn was to take songs he knew in English and then translate them into the new language. The trick is he wouldn't translate it word for word. He would learn about the people and say the lyrics, quote, how they would say it. How he figured that out, I have no idea. Story 7. Maybe not creepy in a conventional way, but blew my mind and convinced me he was a cyborg. I found myself working on intelligence while I was deployed to Afghanistan. New world to me. Never trained or worked in the field. I was an infantryman. I was the NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, and worked with the OIC, officer in charge, Mike. Mike had this unnatural ability to recall random, obscure intelligence reports from months back. For example, say we got an immediate release report saying there was going to be some weapons and ammunition smuggled into our area. He could instantly recall several reports from way back that connected to the new report. No lie, his genius was so deep. It happened many times and led to many successful operations. The best part? Every single person in our unit came home alive, and that was due in very large part to his supernatural ability. I just feel lucky to have been involved and insanely proud and honored to be a part of the team with him, even if I always felt like I was a kid trying to play at the grown-up tables. Story 8. I used to know someone who would be pretty quiet around people he didn't know, only give info when asked, and half of it. I took it as guarded until I got really close to him. What piqued my interest was when he said, I don't like her. She's scary smart but plays dumb. I dislike scary smart people like that. It's because he used to be manipulative when he was younger, and admitted it, while saying, I'm not like that anymore. I noticed he was always watching and reading people. He'd know who you can tell things to and who you can't. He knows who has dated who and would read people's mannerisms. He would say things like, he had trauma as a kid, that's why I was nice to him. He fake laughs after saying something, even if it's repeating what you say. It's as if he's trying to start laughter because he doesn't know how to make people genuinely laugh, but wants them to, and doesn't know how to do that other than being funny or charismatic. And even unnecessary compliments like a personal hype guy. Common approval-seeking traits for children who had bad family lives. That's why he talked to you about foster care, because he was probably in the system. And yeah, that dude was in the system. Called out so quickly. Your stepmom probably wants to run the family instead of your dad because your dad works and she doesn't, and he doesn't want to constantly rein in the kids and grandkids. She wants some semblance of control because she doesn't work. She's a busybody with nothing to do but watch the news and send emails and texts all day. That's why she's judgmental, because she knows it's false control, but it's all she has. That was the best way to put my stepmom, a person he's never met, because she's annoying as hell, and he only knew such a small amount of details about her because of what I had said to him. He says this stuff like it's common knowledge while drinking, as if it's all monotonous to him. Scares me to think about how he used to be manipulative. Story 9. I used to drag race. One of my racing buddies is a mechanical engineer. We were at the track one day, pitted together with our cars, and were discussing gear ratios and whatnot. I was running 36-inch tall rear tires. The car was going through the traps, finish line at about 6,200 RPM in the 1/8 mile, at 148 miles per hour. Peak power for my engine at the time was 7100 RPM. The idea is to get the car into the 7100 RPM range quicker and for longer periods of time, which will make the car faster on the top end, and having more gear in it means the car would leave harder too. So I'm thinking about this and I said, I wonder how many times these tires rotate when the car makes a clean 1.8 mile pass. Within 10 seconds, he said, 70 and a quarter revolutions. I'm like, bruh. I walked into the trailer to get my calculator, so I calculated, rollout, a 36-inch tall tire will move forward 113.04 inches on a full rotation. 36 times 3.14. Convert that to feet gives you 9.42 feet. Divide the length of the track by the rollout, 660 divided by 9.42, and you get 70.06. None of this is advanced math, but dude did it in his head in about 10 seconds. We've got apps to do this stuff nowadays, but it was an impressive thing to see happen. Story 10. My cousin is some kind of genius, like the kind of genius that doesn't know how to interact with humans. During a family dinner, the kids were sat at the kids' table. We were all talking about kid stuff, games, TV shows, drama at school, sports, teasing each other. Someone decided to go around the table and everyone shows their favorite video on the internet. Stuff like Vines, Reels, Shorts, etc. This dude gets his phone out and puts an hour-long brain surgery video on. In the middle of us eating lamb curry. A bunch of the younger people start retching and crying and stuff, and he stops the video, but he starts reciting the whole procedure, pointing out what was wrong and what should have been done. All of it. Keep in mind, he was only around 11 years old. The parents come to see what's wrong, and they're just so stunned they can't stop him. An uncle, who was a surgeon, later told everyone that what he said was technically right. Still under-researched and not practiced yet. No one knows how he knew all that, but my younger brother still doesn't eat lamb. Story 11. I was a kid in the 80s, and my dad's best friend who worked with him came over and saw me messing around with my Commodore 64. I showed him I was working on coding it to draw a little line in BASIC. This was all new, and I was excited at the time. How technology has changed. And he goes, let me make a couple adjustments on the math, and sits down. In a few lines of code, out comes a Mandelbrot fractal that grows and expands with overlapping fractals on my 16-color EGA monitor. This was years before I had to see something similar with Windows Lines, a screensaver. I know fractals are somewhat straightforward for those who know the math, but to be able to sit down out of the blue and do this in a few minutes required a level of skills and knowledge that blows me away, especially done as a one-off for a kid. It really inspired me. He was also the one who told me that the reason we haven't found extraterrestrial life is because of time, not space. Like putting a person in New York and Florida and giving them 5 minutes to find each other. He spent his later years consulting for Apple, basically doing what he liked working on, and is now retired and long-haired, playing bass and guitar in lounges most evenings. I don't think this is a creepy display of intelligence. I think this is a super cool one. Clearly, OP was inspired for his whole life because of this. That's awesome. That's like the best way to foster curiosity in a kid. Sounds like OP had some really cool role models growing up. Story 12. I don't know if it's creepy, but my son is a genius. Yeah, every mom thinks that, but mine actually is. He has ASD, but at 9 months, he could run, not walk. He took a drawer apart in the doctor's office, and the doctor was amazed. At 5, he could read chapter books. By the end of the 3rd grade, he had read all of the Harry Potter books. His special gift isn't reading, though, it's math and science. Since he was young, they wanted to have him skip grades, and we wouldn't let them. He had no social skills, so he was in pragmatic speech, and we had him in clubs and sports. It was important he learned how to relate to his peers. He learned how to make friends like other kids learn how to ride a bike, but he did it eventually. His teachers always found extra things to stimulate him, above and beyond. He can do high-order math in his head. His youngest sister can as well. She's a data analytics and mathematics major, by the way. He's a chemist/chemical engineer. He's an adult now. He graduated college with a 4.0. There are 3 awards they give at every college that has an accredited chemistry program. 1 in organic chemistry, 1 in organic chemistry, and 1 in physical chemistry. While in college, he won all 3. He remembers everything he reads or hears, even weird little non-essential facts. The last time his IQ was tested, it was 164. They test when they do his ASD stuff. Thanks to his autism specialist growing up, the pragmatic speech therapist, and his teachers, most people don't realize he has autism spectrum disorder, but he had select mutism until he was 9. They would pull his sisters out of class so he could whisper to them if anything was wrong he needed to talk about. He's one of those people that everyone walks away after meeting him and says he's the smartest person they ever met, but he's humble and still kind of shy and reserved. He is deathly loyal to his siblings and protective of them. He is one of the best men I know. I am so proud of who he grew up to be. I know, Sounds like a mom. Story 13. My then 4-year-old daughter. We have a long history of high intelligence plus depression, bipolar 2, on my mom's side. I didn't know that mental illness was hereditary, or I may have chosen not to have biological kids of my own. I myself am afflicted with what I like to call the gene. Anyhow, I walked into the bathroom one day and my 4-year-old daughter was watching water run out of the faucet and down the drain, but she was crying. I said, "Sweetie, why are you crying?" And she said she's never going to see any of this water again. She understood as the water was coming out of the faucet and going down the drain that it was disappearing forever, and indeed, she'd never see that water again. I made a mental note of it, and life went on. At age 6, I took her in to be evaluated for ADHD and learning disabilities. She has both, and they tested her IQ. 140. Average is 100. Indeed, she suffers from depression and by age 6 was on antidepressants. Nothing like your 7-year-old screaming that she wants to take her own life after a long day at Disney World. So yeah, screw you, the gene. Despite the intelligence and all that, the anecdote of walking in on your daughter crying as she's at the faucet, and then explaining that it's because she'll never see the water again, that is still very quintessential child behavior. And for them, it's like, yeah, they're really upset. It's real for them, but come on. That is funny, right? I'm not just insensitive to kids. Uh-oh. Story 14. I worked at a psych hospital about 10 years ago. I floated, so I worked on all the units wherever they were short-staffed. For a couple days one week, I was pulled to the adolescent unit. There was a 12-year-old boy, let's call him Joe. He was brought in from another residential center. At this other residential center, Joe was a ringleader of boys aged 10 to 13 who would assault girls who were at the center. Joe knew the schedule of the staff and their rotation. He knew the diligent staff members and the not-so-diligent ones, so he would plan their attacks. Joe was the only patient that truly frightened me, due to his intelligence and clear lack of remorse/getting off on other people's pain. When I observed him, he would do little things such as make a certain noise that he knew would set off another child there. He was good at making friends with the other children and charming them. At one point, they did a search of his room and found a bunch of the staff's schedules in there. I'm waiting to hear a story of him being a serial murderer now that he's in his 20s. Intelligence gone horribly wrong. Story 15. One of my first proper jobs involved data processing. The way it worked is you'd get a parcel of documents off a shelf, take it back to your desk and work through each document, transcribing certain details onto a computer. The pay wasn't great, but you'd get a bonus based on how many documents you'd processed. The catch was that not all parcels were the same. Some were largely computer-generated, easy to read, and were often just the same details over and over. If you picked up one of those parcels, it was easy to get your numbers up. But some parcels were really crappy, all messy, stuck together, handwritten. If you ended up with too many of those parcels, you risk your numbers dropping and even getting fired. To stop people from searching through the shelves for just the easy work, there was a simple rule. You always had to get the first parcel from the left of the shelf. This was seriously enforced with the shelves placed in front of the team, so everyone could see that the parcels were handled fairly. It was then just the luck of the draw with which parcel you'd pick up. If anyone was caught trying to just pick up easy parcels, the rest of the team would probably string them up. Effectively, they were stealing money from them. Throughout this job, I really struggled to meet my targets. Some days I'd only just squeeze through because I'd sneakily work through my lunch break to make up the numbers. Some days I came in expecting to get fired because of poor performance. It was the complete opposite for a colleague called Sarah. Sarah was one of the best data processors the company had ever seen. She easily hit the top of the team leaderboard every day and was earning a fair bit in bonus. She'd started at the same time as me, so it was just salt in the wound for me as I struggled to keep my job. What was really insane, though, was that Sarah was already rich. At least, she came from a rich family. Like, they had their own country estate. It was weird that Sarah was even doing a, quote, normal job like this. Not only that she was one of the best people in the office. Because Sarah's birthday was close to Christmas, she had a deal with her parents where each year they'd buy her a rental property. So by the time I knew her, she already had about half a dozen rental properties, all providing her with an income. All the money she made from the normal job was used to expand her property portfolio. She still lived with her parents and they covered all her living expenses. It used to drive me mad that someone from a rich family who didn't need to work, who already owned multiple properties, was doing a normal person job like this. Not only that, Sarah was so much better at the job than me without trying, seemingly. I already had a background in data processing and typing, but this was Sarah's first job and she was earning so much more than anyone on the team. Sarah seemed to be a very sheltered girl. She was quiet, had no opinion on politics, and never talked about hobbies or personal life. She just didn't come across as a smart person. It was more like she had nothing going on in her head. I wondered if she was genetically better than me, like if the success of her family was down to them just being smarter. I wondered if because Sarah didn't have any actual worries or responsibilities outside of work, like bills to pay, it gave her the brain space to fully concentrate more on the job. Sarah retired when she was 30 and now just lives off the rental income from her property empire. It wasn't until a couple years after she left the company that I found out through a mutual friend how Sarah had been cheating. The rules of the job were that you must take the first parcel on the shelf. Everyone on the team watched the shelf like a hawk, because if one person got all the good parcels, it would mean that everyone else has to work harder and get less money. What Sarah was doing was coming into the office 15 minutes before everyone else, and she would sort the shelves based on her needs. So if she knew she'd be needing a new parcel soon, she would move a lot of good parcels to the front of the queue. If she was already working through a parcel that was going to last her to the end of the day, she'd move all the bad parcels to the front of the shelves to ensure the team cleared them. Doing this meant she always got the easy work. She must have come up with this system within a few days of starting the job. She did it for 6 years and was never caught. Everyone else on that team, including myself, was working harder and earning less money so Sarah could earn money she didn't even need. Maybe not the creepiest, but definitely the most aggravating use of intelligence. Although I don't even know how intelligent this is. Like, really? No one else thought of doing this? Like, you could just go in early and look through them? Or did she have a special position that let her do that? I don't quite get it. Anyway, yeah. While not stealing from you guys, definitely putting you at a disadvantage. A very selfish thing to do, which, given her background, I'm not wholly surprised by. Story 16. So I've been told that this is worrying and I should not bring it up in conversation. I drive a garbage truck in the town that I live in. I've been doing it for about 5 years. My route is loaded on a tablet where I have customers' names and addresses. It's an average route, so in any given week I'm driving past almost 5,000 houses. My brain gets bored as I'm doing my shift. Doesn't matter how many podcasts or audiobooks I listen to during my shifts, so I look at the names. Some are dull, like a Jones or a Smith. Some aren't. Over time, some of them stick in my head, and I remember what their names are. Couple that with what cars are in the driveway, and I start noticing them around town. Now, here's the part my wife tells me I'm supposed to stop doing because it's creepy. My kids are older, and I'll take them to their extracurriculars. While I'm there, I chat with everyone. I used to be in sales, so conversations is how I passed the time. Usually at the beginning of the conversation, I hear their name, and I would casually mention which car in the lot was theirs. I'm also a car guy, so I like it when people recognize my car. If I didn't know the car, I would ask them if they lived in a certain neighborhood. Not exact streets or house numbers because I knew that would be odd, just neighborhoods. Long story short, people talk to my wife and I keep to myself or don't go out anymore. OP, man, it's impressive, but it's really creepy, dude. You can't just be like, oh yeah, I know, you drive this, right? Because if they haven't met you before, it just sounds like you're stalking them. Don't do that. Story 17. When I was 12, my parents were fighting a lot, and we were incredibly poor, among other issues. I would cope by riding my bike up and down the road while whispering my frustrations to myself in an hour-long vent. The downside is everyone probably thought I was crazy. The plus side? Hey, I was in great shape. I was doing this one afternoon when I saw an old man whispering to himself by the mailbox. He was careful to make eye contact with me, and he made sure his whispering was noticed. It was all very deliberate. I thought he was making fun of me, so I pulled over to chat with him. Nobody really paid me any attention back then, good or bad, and this old man asked me why I performed my daily ritual. I gave him a vague answer like trouble at home. He asked a few mundane questions like, where would you like to move when you're older? Do you have any siblings? Etc. And from a few questions, he sized me up immediately. Basically knew everything about me. He even deduced I was gay, which nobody knew. At the end of it all, he gave me very sagely advice and recommended I find a creative outlet. To this day, I'm an artist. The strange part is I never saw him again, and nobody at the house recognized him when I described him to them. OP, I think you saw some sort of either trickster god or a muse or something. The fact this person seems to have never existed? Crazy. Horrifying. Or hey, maybe you hallucinated him. It was just coping plus. Either way, it seems to have worked out for you, but definitely a bit freaky. Story 18. My 6-year-old daughter sometimes does or says something out of nowhere that just shocks us. She has this super cute little voice. She's cute and giggly and will act like she can't do anything for herself. Now I wonder if she does it on purpose. Examples include reading a difficult sentence my son was trying to sound out just by glancing at it and then denies ever doing it. When she was 4, she knew exactly how many people would fit into each car for a family reunion trip to a restaurant within seconds. The adults were all stressing over who goes to which car. She was right. I'm from Italy and I speak Italian to my mom and Nonna all the time on the phone, but I speak English to my kids. I thought they didn't know Italian. My son can't understand it very well, but apparently she can. I know this because my mom was telling me about getting my kids bikes for Christmas and my daughter gasped and looked excited for a second. Then when she realized that she reacted, she denied ever doing it or knowing anything about the bikes. My mom and I were speaking in Italian so the kids wouldn't have their surprise spoiled. Oh well, her basic math skills are also better than mine. She can do a lot of it in her head, even if she can't explain how she got the answers. Granted, I have dyscalculia, but still. Story 19. Oh, my wife won this one. We were trying to buy 2 air purifiers for my daughter's rooms at Target. The checkout clerk rang them up as $150 each, but they were clearly priced for $50 on the Target app, which my wife was smart enough to save. Clerk told her she would not honor the price and only give a discount on the first item. My wife immediately clicked buy on the app and selected in-store pickup. We then waited 20 minutes while the clerk argued with her manager and waited by customer service for pickup. Manager had to give us the items at pickup. No idea why the clerk was such a jerk to my wife. Long story short, Target has predatory pricing. They show you one price outside of the store and one price in the store. Best Buy tries this trick too sometimes by canceling your order after telling you it's ready for pickup. Story 20. This isn't so much creepy as awesome. My father's a doctor, retired allergist, former pediatrician. When my first child was born, he was turning blue when he cried, and the doctors didn't know why, so they transferred him to another hospital with a world-class NICU. The doctor there diagnosed him with polycythemia, too many red blood cells, and said the treatment was a partial transfusion. Basically, they were going to take out some blood and replace it with saline to just thin it out. The doctor came in and spoke to my father, who introduced himself as a pediatrician and the grandfather, and explained how much blood they were going to take out. I don't remember the numbers, but my father started muttering to himself. Okay, how much does the baby weigh? That, okay. That means he has this many ounces of blood. Okay, and his numbers were that, okay. And they need to be here, that's this percentage. Blood needs to be thinned to this, multiplied by this. Okay, so that means he needs to take out 6 cc's of blood. How much did he say he was taking out? 4? Okay, good. He's being conservative. He can always take out more later. I was in awe. He was doing complex medical calculations in his head and validated what the doctor was doing. They ended up doing a second transfusion after that, but all was well. Story 21. A friend of mine had been involved with a guy she worked at who turned out to be married with a young child. The friend was particularly vulnerable as she'd just gotten out of a horrifically abusive marriage and had zero concept of what appropriate boundaries looked like. Guys started to jerk her around and string her along while subtly eroding the little bit of self-esteem she'd scraped up since her divorce. Then he started milking her financially. Obviously, he didn't leave his wife when he did all this. Enter uni friend. She told our friend exactly what to say and how to react when he says this and does that. She was spot on with the things she predicted he would say and do. And the responses and reactions were designed, as she put it, to, quote, give him a taste of his own medicine. Except his was the equivalent to prescribing Vicks, while she dosed him with cyanide, metaphorically speaking. Within 48 hours of her following instructions and with a no prior history of issues, he had gone AWOL from work and was finally found in the local hospital where he was on an involuntary hold after emergency services found him attempting to seriously harm himself. Unifriend had never met this man, but she predicted everything he would do correctly and also knew exactly what things would do the most damage to him psychologically in the shortest possible time frame. I often wonder whether she's a psychopath or just incredibly good at reading people. Story 22. I work in a restaurant, and my boss has a near encyclopedic knowledge of just about everything. It isn't immediately evident because he's big and loud and has an obnoxious sense of humor. What you'd expect from someone who spent their whole life in food service, basically. But if you ever work with him, he'll open his mouth and start talking about whatever interests him that week, with a depth of knowledge far beyond normal person. He remembers everything he reads, and that's all he does during the off-season. Apparently he has something like a photographic memory. His dad told me once that he would describe what pages of books looked like. Like it's the page with a strand of hair on it, it has the folded edge and the picture of the woman with the big nose, and then would get confused when nobody else knew what he was talking about. I've seen him glance casually at a delivery invoice and then recite the entire thing to himself in order while putting orders away. Another time I overheard him loudly talking about why it's better to have a short and fat dong than a long and skinny one, and when I came back 10 minutes later, he was reciting the entire Bill of Rights, word for word, without notes. He's a good example of someone who was just too smart for school. He could read by the time he was 2, and by the time he got to school, he was so far beyond the expected reading level that he refused to do the work. He already knew it, and he didn't understand why his teachers didn't believe him. This continued for most of his academic career. He would ace his exams without studying, but he would flunk because he never came to class and didn't bother doing the homework because he already knew the answers. He was much more interested in drinking and partying with his friends and only cared about learning if it was on his own time, and if it was a specific thing he happened to be interested in. He told me once that he was smoking weed in a parking lot with his friends when he remembered he was supposed to take the SATs that day. He had his brother drop him off completely baked. Apparently about halfway through the test he started to sober up, went back, looked at his work and decided, that's probably good enough, and finished it. He passed with flying colors. Later on he dropped out of high school to work at the restaurant, a family business, but he still knows more than I will ever forget. Now, I know OP's not the one to come up with it, but knows more than I will ever forget is a pretty hard line. It's interesting to hear what people consider intelligence, because people have all sorts of definitions for it. There were plenty in here that were about personal intelligence, or like interpersonal intelligence, I should say. Being able to read people, situations, knowing how to talk to people. And then there's the more, I guess I want to say typical intelligence, book smarts, basically. But there's a good array of all of it in this thread. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.